Welcome to the fastest stop in town. Today, Masechtas Bava Kama Daf Chaf Aleph. We are going to begin on the very top of Chaf Aleph, Amud Aleph, the very top line. Sholach le Rabbi Abba bar Zabda. So he sent a message, Lamori bar Mar. Boimini bar Rav Huna. So the question was posed, Hadar b'chatzer chavero, Shalom Edaita, which we saw in yesterday's daf. If someone's living in someone else's property, someone else's courtyard, and it's without that person's consent, sarch laloi slo sachar olo, is it necessary to pay or not? Now, Rashi says it can't just be talking about in any scenario, but it has to be as we specifically explained in yesterday's daf. Doloi kaimel agra, shalom edas in sarch. Shalom das ein sarch laloi sachar. So in the situation, if let's say he's not paying, he wouldn't have gotten rent anyway. So it's a case of zen hena, because he would have had to have gotten rented another property. V'zel lo chaser. The other person's not losing out because he wouldn't have rented it out anyway. So that was the case. It was a case that would be rented out of zen nehen of zeh chaser, then certainly you would have to pay. But here we're talking, or let's say zeh lo nehena, because this guy could have lived somewhere else rent free anyway, so he's not really getting hana. So zeh lo nehena of zeh lo chaser, you would be potter. So over here it's davkas the machlok, the question rather, is in a case of zeh nehena v'zeh lo chaser, because he wasn't going to rent it out anyway. Adahachi nach nashi de Rav Huna. In the meanwhile, and this question was posed, Rav Huna had died. Amalei Rabba bar Rav Huna, Hachi Omer Abba. This is what my father said. So this is Rabba, the son of Rav Huna. So even though Rav Huna died, his son Rabba obviously knew the answer. Mari Mishmid Rav, it was said actually in the name of Rav, Ein Sarach La'asol Sachar. Then in that case, the one who's living in this property, in this courtyard, does not need to pay rent. Okay. So Zen Nehen of Zelu Chaser, you do not pay rent. V'asaycher, bias Reuven, someone who's renting a house from Reuven, Malos Sachar L'Shimoin. So he has to pay rent to Shimon. So again, if he's renting a house from Reuben, you pay Shimon. So Shimon, Maya Vidite, what does that mean? Who's Shimon? What does that mean? So Hakakamar, Nimsa Bayashel Shimon Malo Sachar. If it turns out that it was actually Shimon's property, then you have to pay Shimon. So Tarti, it's a stira. What are we talking about? We just said that if someone's living there, you don't have to pay rent. And now you're telling me if we find out who the owner is, do you have to pay the guy rent? So, ha de kaimel agra, ha de kaimel agra. As we said before, if he rents out his property, so that's a case of zechaser. So that's why you'll be chayiv. However, it's a case where he doesn't rent out his property, that's zelo chaser, and therefore you would not pay. Itmar nami. We learned something similar to this. Amar Rav Chiya bar Rav and Amar Rav. The Amar, some say was Amar Rav Chiya bar Rav and Amar Rav Huna. Hadar b'chatzer chaver shalom edaito. Again, living there without that person's consent, ain't sarach l'asol sachar. But sarach b'ayis mimnei ear. If you rent a house from people in the city, mal sachar l'balam, you pay to the owners. Balam ma'aviditayu. Who are the owners? Kachkamer. Mimsel l'balam mal no hem schayet to pay. So Tarti, it sounds like a contradiction. Hadekaimel agra, hadekaimel agra. As we said, in the event where you are, so they would collect rent, so it's zechaser, so you'd be chayiv. Okay, great. So that said, let's continue. Amar Rav Sachayra, Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav Hadar b'chatzer chaveroi. A person is living in, again, someone else's courtyard, and it's shalom edaita, without consent. Ein sarach lalus lo sachar. You do not have to pay. Mishum shnemar, because the pasuk says, Ushiyah yukas shoar. In desolation, the gate will be destroyed. Now, what does that mean? It almost sounds like this guy's doing you a favor. Why? Because shade, shishmo shia, there's actually a shade that has the name Shia, Mikate Shar Base, She'ein B'nei Adam, Dorinbo. It's like a haunted house. This shade lives in a home where there's no one there. So that's what he does in an unoccupied home. So this person is actually helping this guy out, because the fact that he's living there, the shade will not be there. They gather together over there. Back in the Gemara. I actually saw this. And the shade gores like an ox. It's not a joke. This is a serious thing. The house is meant to be dwelled in. What does that mean? It says Rashi, it's important if you have to leave your house, you go away, let's say for a vacation, you should have your neighbors check on your house, because what if there's a leak or something terrible could be happening to your house? So the fact that they're in the house, they're able to watch it and maybe upkeep it. So actually, again, for the same reason, it's good they're there. So my benayu, that if you're able to put something in it, says Rashi, it doesn't have to be that people live in it. It has to be that it's used for some utility, some purpose. So therefore, if it's a storage house where people are coming and going and putting their things in there, so then that also will avoid the shadim from coming and raising havoc. Mishum beisa misva ika the ein ze yishuv v'zeh shedarbo yafo asa v'hanho. But those workers leave. It's a 9-to-5 job. Let's say. Let's imagine even if it's that. They just drop things off and leave. They don't really know what's going on, as opposed to a person who's actually living in that house for an extended period of time. So this is Rabbi Gibber's question. The shade won't haunt the house, what I wrote. Or, this is over 30 years ago. If anything breaks, he'll be there to let him know or fix it. Without him, the problem would be worse. Okay, great answer. All right. Weiter. Okay, that was a little Gemara of a haunted house. So my binayu. So again, the difference between the two is mishtamish b'nei b'tzivi b'tivna. Now who gavra? So now we have a little story of a person debana apadna a kilkalta tiyasmi. He built a palace, a very nice quarters, and he built it on, Rashi says, an ashba, like a garbage heap of the assignment. So Agbi Rab Nachman la'apadne mine. So he wanted to collect from this beautiful property. That's why he took away his house, because it must be that he had to pay rent and for the use of this land to the assignment. Hahumi Kara Karmanoi Havi Daribe. Originally, Karnamoy, which is the name of a nation, Rashi says, or Kadmoinim Hoyoshim Boy, other people were there, and they were paying money to them, Bahavli Kaimel Agra. So Vyavli Asmi Davarmuit, they were paying. So since they were paying, and then for whatever they left, this is actually a situation, as we said, where a person it is Kaimel Agra, where they are receiving rent, and therefore that's the reason why we're able to collect. Simara says, okay, that's a good point. Paisinhu liasmi v'lo ashkach. So he said, go and appease them, and he didn't pay any attention. So Rav Nachman la'an la'apadne mine. That's why he took away his house. In other words, he told him, listen, you owe a couple bucks for rent, and the guy just ignored him. So if you're going to start ignoring, then we were compelled to take your property away. He could have dealt with it easily and just paid them, and that would have been the end of it. So sometimes you have to pay for damages, and sometimes you pay only the hana, but not the damages. Okay, and we discussed, even if, let's say, he eats a high-quality food that is fit to eat, so you don't have to feed your animal that high-level quality food, so maybe you have to pay the value of almir, of straw, or maybe 2/3 of the value of the item that was eaten. But the focus here is actually the v'chulu. So it says like this. So let's just read the Mishnah. If the animal is eating in the street, now that makes sense because the street is Rishus Harabim, and therefore Shein Rishus Harabim is pater, but you still have to pay for what it eats. However, if it's on the side of the street, that maybe that's not considered to be a Rishus Harabim, and that's the reason why you're chayiv to pay for the damages. And it says Pesach HaChanos, from the opening of the store, because I guess the fact that it's in the front of a major store, like out in this, that's like a Rishus Harabim. But once you're actually in it, therefore it's like Rishus Nizik, and therefore you have to pay the damages. Okay. So I think we're going to discuss this at greater length. Specifically when it talks about the side of the street. Rav. Rav says, when it says if it's on the side of the street, it's referring to uvim chazeres, where it turns its head, says Rashi. It turns its head from the street to the side of the street. And it eats fruits. So the chiddush of Rav is, even though the animal's physical body is in the Rishus Harabim, the sense it turned its head toward the side, so therefore the din is, that is not considered to be Rishus Harabim. That's considered to be now like the Rishus Nizik, if you will, and therefore that's the reason why we're chayiv. Shmuel Omer Afil Machzeres Nami Pater. No. Even if it turns its head, you're still pater because we know that's considered to be Shein Rishus Harabim. So what would be a case where Shmuel says you would be chayiv, that it's not considered to be anymore that the animal's in a Rishus Harabim? Kagain, for example, Dishav Kata L'Rachava, if it leaves the street, the Ozla become a Siddur Rachava, and it physically moves into the Siddur Rachava. So in that situation, says Rashi, in Derech Shavar Melecha Sham Hilkach Lav Kurishus Harabim Dami. Animals typically don't go in that area. So that's not considered like a Rishus Harabim for animals. And therefore that's why you'll be chayiv, because it's no longer Rishus Harabim. Fine. So this is the Machlokes Rav and Shmuel, in the event that the animal's physically in the Rechava, but it turns its head to the side, is that now considered like it's no longer in the Rishus Harabim. Some people read it by itself. No, it's not on the Mishnah. Machzeres, regarding the turning of the head, Rabbi Rechayev Shmuel Patura. Shmuel Mishalemis Mashazika Hechem Mishkachas Law. The Mechayva. When would you be chayiv? Can go into Shavka Rechava, it leaves the actual street. You also become a B'Siddur Rechava. Okay. So Meisei Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. So on this, he poses the following kasha. Mipesach HaChanos. When it comes to our Mishnah, it says, if the animal is in the entrance of the chanos, in other words, it's in the front, it's not in the store itself, Mishlemis ma shehenes. So that's considered to be still Rishus Harabim, and therefore you only pay the amount that it benefited, but not the damages. So Hechem Mishkachas Law, Pshita b'Machzeres. We're talking about a case of Machzeres. Says Rashi, the Pesach Chanus. the opening of the store, it's not within the street, right? But Kaimer Masha Nehenis in Masha Zika Lo. So it's actually Kash and Rav. We see that when it comes to a case of Machzeres, this must be the case of Pesach Chanos, that it turned its head, and nonetheless, it's still considered to be like a Rosh Hashanah. And therefore, you would be potter from damages. Again, you have to pay for the benefit. So who So the truth is, he asked to answer the same question. The Kaima B'Keren Zavis. We're talking about a different situation, that it's in the Keren Zavis. It's in a corner, says Rashi. What does that mean? The Kaima Chnus, the store is B'Keren Zavis. So this picture helps a little bit. You have a Mavi Katan, in which is perpendicular to the Mavi Gadol. And then there's a corner. It would be nice if it made this picture, but there's a pit. The animal is, and the chanos rather, the store is between the Mavi Kat and the Mavi Gadol at that corner. And the animal is going straight and gets to the store, and it's going straight from the Mavi Gadol, which is Rosh Hashanah, and it goes directly into the store. And therefore, because of that, that's the reason why in this situation you only pay Hana and not Hezek, not for the Nizik, because it's clearly just walking. It's walking, and it just bumps into this air, into this Chanus, the Pesach Chanus, and that's still considered Rosh Hashanah. As Rashi over here says, Derech Hilucha Dela Machzeresi. This is not a case of Machzeres. Okay. Some say maybe everyone says that as long as the animal turns its head from the street to the side, then you are chayev, because it's no longer considered like Rosh Hashanah. Ki pligi, where does Rav and Shmuel argue? If it left part of the property from the his Rishus and went to the Rosh Hashanah. Says Rashi, Shikanas L'toich entered into his own. Ubana v'hiniach mikarkoi Rosh Hashanah. He gave some of his land for the Rosh Hashanah, although it's really the owner's, and he puts his peros there. So it's an interesting thing. V'shatach sham peros v'nichnas sham behema derech hilucha v'achaltan. So this guy very generously allowed the front of his area to really belong to the Rosh Hashanah, but it really is his. That's why he puts his fruit there. So in that situation, the question is that considered to be a Rosh Hashanah, or is it considered to be his property? That's basically the whole thing. V'hachi idmar. The only time you're going to be chayiv is if it turns its head. But if you left part of your property and gave it over to the Rosh Hashanah, then you're going to be potter, because that's still considered like you donate to the Rosh Hashanah. So in that situation is the machlokas. Question 5. Okay. Achum et sidi harachava, mishlemes mashe hezika. Achum et pesach hanos mishlemes mashe henes. So heik mishkachas l'mishalim mashe nehenes, bar pesach hanos b'sidi harachava kaima. It's the sidi harachava. So you should have to pay for the damages, because it's not Rosh Hashanah. So one answer is, we said, maybe l'chor it's a raya. We're talking about a situation where the animal turned its head from the Rechava to the Pesach Chanos, and therefore we see that, unlike Rav, we see that the din is that you are going to be potter in that situation from paying damages. Alternatively, no, it's talking about the Chaim Chanos B'Keren Zavis, that the store is in a corner. The Pag B'Peres Derech Hilucha was just walking. It didn't turn its head at all. Okay. So that's the way to answer that question. All right, weiter. So according to this other lashon, we're saying no. It makes no difference. Even if we're talking about when it comes to the case of Machzeres, Rav and Shmuel do not disagree. They all say the same thing, that you're chayiv in that case because it's considered no longer Rishos HaRabim. But the question is, this area which is like in between, what is the din? So on this, the Gemara says like this. Okay, so maybe that's the machlokas. V'hachi idmar. Omer Rav lo shana el machzeres el makatza makam Rishos HaRabim patura. Shmuel Emer fil makatza makam Rishos HaRabim chayeves. So lema, let's say, maybe they, Rav and Shmuel, argue regarding, as Rashi says, if you dig a hole in your property, then you're mafker your own reshus. V'lo hifker boiro, but you are not mafker your pit. So in this situation, it's actually a machlokes, Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Kiva, as we'll see much later on in Daf Mem Tes, that Rav holds that you're still chayiv if something happens, someone falls into that pit, even though you were mafker the property, but you weren't mafker the pit. And therefore, maybe for the same reason, he would say that this animal that ate the fruits that were in front of this property, in which is connected to the Rishos HaRabim, because he kind of like gave it to the Rishos HaRabim, he also used it because it's really his. That's comparable to the boar. Fine. Because he was mafkir his rishus. Therefore, that's okay, fine. And the Kamash 1, Rashi says, Kol hamikalkol rishus harabim. Anyone who does damages in rishus harabim, sheziku chayav l'shalim. Kol hamazikin behen zacha. So if the animal eats those fruits, you should be pater. Anyone who takes these fruits should pater them. That's one shot. That's one way. So again, we're talking specifically in a case where the person was mafker his property, similar to the case mafker his property, put the fruits there. Here, he was mafker his property, and he let his pit there. So it's like this. So lema babor b'shusa kamifli. Rav de Omer Potter. Rav who says that the animal's eating those fruits and says you're Potter because it's still considered to be like part of the Rishos HaRabim. Sover bor b'shusa chayiv. He'll say that this pit, since it's a bor b'shusa HaRabim, because you're a mafker the property, anytime you do damage, you dig a pit in the Rishos HaRabim and someone gets damaged, you're chayiv for it. Shmuel di'er chayiv. Shmuel says you're chayiv. Why? Because the animal who ate those fruits were really on his private property. Savar bor b'shusa potter. He actually holds maybe that when it comes to digging a pit, you're going to be potter in that case, even though you were mafker the property. So Rav would say, as we continue to Daf Chaf Aleph on the base, no, that's not a good comparison. But Alma, in general, bor b'rshus, so potter. If a person digs a pit in his property that he was mafker, and someone gets damaged by it, we don't say, well, that's considered like it's now considered like public property, and therefore you dug a pit in public property. No, you're potter. B'shani hacha, it's different over here. The oimer, because the owner of the damaged ox can say, Lav kol kaminach de mikarvis lahu lapeiroskol rishos harabim. Basically, it should not have been you to put your fruits in the rishos harabim and mechayavis lahu Torah oi and make my animal chayiv. In other words, the reality is you shouldn't have put your fruit over there. So what are you expecting? There's animals all over the place. So it's obvious that this is what's going to happen. So therefore, you shouldn't have put your fruit in such a vulnerable position. And therefore, I should be potter. Normally, if you would dig a pit in this case, and you're a mafker the property, you're going to be chayiv because it's considered like you dug a pit in the Rishos HaRabim. If someone gets damaged, then you're going to be chayiv. The bishlam abor ikla meimor lav adate. When it comes to a pit, you can say I wasn't thinking. El leperos meiko memer lava date hachazilu. You see the fruits are there. In other words, when a person has their animal walking, so you can understand it could possibly fall into a pit because you're not paying attention. But if you see a whole bundle of fruit and you see your animals eating those fruit, then certainly you should be chayiv in that situation because you shouldn't have allowed that to happen. Question 6. Mixus makam reshusai. Mikatsa makam reshusai reshus rabim. So again, you designated part of your property. Rabbi Matushma Mechayeves. Masvaras Tiesh Leimer Dultalia Baputa de Rabbi Kiva Rishmu Babor Reshusai. Not an easy question, we just did it. Rav, according to Rav, who says that when it comes to the animal eating those fruits in front of your property, that you're going to be putter, he's going to say why it's not right that your fruit were there, right? In the middle of basically where all these animals are. And then he says like this. Dishani hacha. What are you doing putting your fruit right over, basically it's in the Rosh Hashanah. So I shouldn't be responsible for those fruits that were eaten. Abu Babor, when it comes to the pit that you dug, Al Bor Bershus Harabim. So over there was a Bor Bershus Harabim. So over there, it makes sense. You should be chayiv in that case. The Shmuel, Bishul Babor Equal Memor Labadate. I can understand maybe when you should be chayiv when it comes to the case of the pit. The shore, the Naturi Nashi Mebor. Lafika chayiv Bal Habor, Abu Paris Hachazilhu. So you can say, I have to protect my animal from falling into a pit, so therefore you should be chayiv. However, when it comes to the case of the peros, I see them, and therefore, in that situation, I should be responsible in that case as well. Okay. Hopefully I said that correctly. Let's look at Rabbi Gibber's test, question 1. Inyan behema she'achla metzidi harachava techsib mishnah mishalim masha hazika. So you have to pay the damages. Nechlu ba Rabbi Shmuel, so b'ma nechaku. 2 answers. Either the animal's guf is in the Rishus Harabim and it's eating in the Rishus Yachid by turning its head, chayzeres, or a person has a Rishus Yachid. It moves his fence closer to himself. He left his peros on his old land and now is open to the Rishus Harabim and the animal eats it. Beautiful. All right. TA 9. Behemish achim pesach chanus kama mishalemes masha zika o shehenes. So machzeres put to begemara. Ve'eno machzeres, if it doesn't turn mishalemes masha nehenes. Obviously, because in that case it's considered to be a rishus harabim, and therefore you're potter for paying damages. That was TA 9. All right, let's just see that we have this. TA 9 is this case of machzeres is a machlokas. Okay, in a machzeres you only have to pay masha nehenes. Okay. TB 10. No, we're not up to that yet. Okay, so in that case, let's continue. Okay, so again, we cannot compare this case. I want to see this Rashi one more time, actually. So, again, the case we're talking about is he owned property and a pit. He was mafker the land, but he kept the pit. So there's a machlokus in that case. Rav holds chayiv mishum hachi patura. Over there, you're chayiv if something happens to the animal that falls into that pit. But over here, you're going to be patur for eating the fruits. Hach behema the zesh shatach sham peirosav havli kamo bor. So those fruits are like a pit. Shim hochaka behen behema chayiv. If let's say the animal would have slipped on those fruits, then the owner would be chayiv, just like the case of a boar, Rishus Harabim. Shari hifkir Rishuso. Therefore, since he was Makros Rishus, it's like Rishus Harabim. And therefore, that bor, Rishus Harabim, if there's damages, you're chayiv to pay for those damages. Hilkach, lo hayu lo inyan elasos kain. You shouldn't have done that. And we says, Kol Makachum Rishus Harabim sheziko chayin l'sham v'chol hamazik behen zacha. So that's why we're saying, again, in the Havamina, we thought that Rav, who held that you were potter in eating those fruits, is because he holds bor b'rishus chayiv, because those fruits are just like the pit. So just like the pit, or the fruits, if they would have done damage, you'd be chayiv. So too, those fruits are basically, you could eat those fruits just the same, and you're not going to have to pay for them. That's the reason why. And Shmuel, who said that you'd be chayiv for eating those fruits, why? It must be because he's not comparing it to this case, or he says bor b'rishus potter. So I end up saying, though, it's not necessarily the same thing. It's not necessarily the same thing. Okay. Okay. Weiter. Chav alf on base. Olema machzeres tenohi. Maybe this machlokas Rav and Shmuel, according to maybe the first opinion, that it is a machlokas, is also a machlokas among tenoim. The sanya. Ochel mitoich harchava. The animal eats within the square, Mishlemis Masha Nehenes, because that's already considered like a Rishus Harabim. Messina Rechava, but it's on the side of it, Mishlemis Masha Azika, Dibra Meir. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Lezer, Imrim, Ein Dark Lechel El Halich. It's not the normal way for it to go, to eat, except while it's going. So Rabbi Yosef Hanatan Kama, what is the difference? What are they saying? There must be some machlokas between them. So El Machzeres Ikbenayu. The machlokas is whether or not the din of machzeres now constitutes it no longer as a Rishus Harabim to be chayiv with shane. Tanakama savar machzeres nami mishal mash and nehenes. According to the Tanakama, you would still only have to pay for what you eat, not the benefit, but not the actual damages, because it's still considered Rishus Harabim. Rabbi Yosef savar mishal mash zika. Okay, so look at this Rashi. When you're on the side, because the animal physically moved to that part. If it only turned his head, low. Doesn't do this. That's how it walks. And therefore, while if it turns its head and eats, you are chayiv. Okay. So maybe that's a machlokas tanaim. So we say machzeres is a machlokas tanaim, which we normally do not like to establish, as we're not going to here either. So the kuliyam machzeres ikaravi kishmul. Really, maybe the tanaim will hold either like Rav or Shmuel, chayiv or potter, but not that they argue. So what is this machlokas here among tanaim? V'hacha bebir b'steyacher kamivagi. When the pasuk says that the chiyuv of shein and regel is only when it's be'er b'steyacher, when it consumes in the nizik's property, what does that mean? It's coming to exclude a Rishus Harabim. Not the Rishus Hamazik. However, no, what does that mean? Rishus Hamazik, if it's in the Rishus Hamazik, obviously you wouldn't be chayiv. You wouldn't need a pasuk to tell you to exclude Rishus Hamazik. Why would you even think in a million years that you'd be chayiv if an animal goes into your property? Your fruits in my rishus, what is it doing here? Maskana, the machokas is Ilf and Rav Oishia. Okay, let's continue the next Mishnah. Huh? Who's that? Fortunately, we have a nice Rashi here. Two of them. So, first of all, again, you wouldn't need a pasuk to tell you that that's what the machlokas is. Okay, because obviously it's excluding Rishus Hamazik. The point is, it's also coming to exclude Rishus Harabim. Okay. The Yilfa of Rabbi Ishia, Ilful El. You don't remember this? We just said it only a couple of blot ago. Behema shepashet savora. If an animal that stuck out its neck, v'achol mi'al gabi chaverta, and it's in the Rishus Harabim, but it's eating on there's a bundle of food on the back of, let's say, another donkey. Chayeves. Now the chiddush is that even though the animal's both animals are Rishus Harabim, but because it's eating in this like private domain, it's almost like a car, it's like maybe like a Rishus Yachid. So this donkey, that's considered V'yer B'Shtei Acher. Rabbi Yishid Yom Behema HaKofetzes V'Yochel B'Toch HaKupa Chayeves. And the other one says, Rabbi Yishid says, no. If it's just turning and eating, that would not constitute a chiyuv. But it was koifetzes. It jumped up, which is a mishuna, which therefore is considered to be a told of Karen. Rameir says, in the street, you're always potter. Always. That's what he says. Rameir holds, let's go back to the language. It says, which means it doesn't make any difference, even if the animal is eating off of another animal's back. That's not the normal way for an animal to stretch its neck like that. So therefore, maybe the whole machlokas is again totally on this whole discussion of ilfin Rabbi Yishia. If an animal turns and eats off of another animal in Rishus Harabim, whether that's considered to still be Rishus Harabim, to be potter or chayiv, and therefore you'd have to say the case of b'koifetzes, and therefore that would be a case where you'd be chayiv, maybe only chatzi nezik, Karen. Okay, fine. Weiter. It says the next Mishnah. Mastis hakelav agadi shekovtzu merosh gag hagag. You have a dog. You have a gedi, a kid, goat, that jumped off a roof, v'shivras a kalim, and in the process of it landing, it broke a kli. So mishal nezik shalom. Obviously, you pay full damages. Neishehin muadin, because it's muad lickvoits. This is the norm that an animal jumps around. Rashi says, Rishus and Nizik Kaimer, the told of the regal he. This is considered to be a told of regal, and therefore that's the reason why I have Nezik Shalim. Okay, that sounds pretty straightforward. Now we see the case that we saw before on Yoches, Hakelim Shanata Charara. So if you have a dog that took a hot biscuit, very hot, Vaholach Gadish, and it goes into a granary, or let's say a field with a lot of food, so it's eating the biscuit, Hagadish, and it burnt up because it was so hot, it touched all the things around and it made a huge fire. So that makes pretty much logical sense. That's considered to be Shein Rishus and Nizik. However, the Chinish is Val Gadish Misham Chatinezik. You pay Chatinezik on all the thing that was burned, and the Gemara is going to explain. Says the Gemara, Taima de Kotsu. The only reason why, if this dog broke a kli from the roof, is if it jumped in a natural way. It was like it wanted to do it. Therefore, that's considered to be like its norm. Hanaflu potter. If the animal fell off the roof and landed, then you would be potter because that's not normal. So we see, even though originally it climbed up the roof, maybe with the intention of doing damage, and then it slips and falls, which is the oinus, so you're potter. So even though it's chilas b'shia, but so oinus, you're still potter. So Tanya mihache kelvin gdisha kafsim marisha gang v'shirmas akelim misham nezik shalom. You pay full damages, but naflu baturin. If it falls, then you're potter, because as we said, there's a case chilas b'shia v'say b'oinus. So there's an opinion that says you'd be chayiv in that case. So how do you make this diak? This diak is a problem to them. We're talking about, for example, that the kalim were actually quite close to the wall, very close. And therefore, the truth is, there was no tchilasa b'pshia in that case. The chikatsu b'kfitza will naflalahu. That if it was going to jump, which is what it was intending to do, it would have bypassed the kli. However, now instead it fell, and when it falls straight down and it broke the kli. But the truth is, it's not a case of chilasa b'pshia because it originally climbed up without the ability for it to break that kli, because the natural way of an animal is for it to climb and then to jump, not to fall. And therefore, if it was climbing up and the kli was nowhere in the range of being broken by a jump, then that's there's not even tchilas b'pshia. Okay. Sometimes falling are also chayiv. If let's say you have a shaky wall, so therefore even the fila is considered to be a pshia. Okay, so my niu di boil yasuki daita the nafel arche. He should have had in mind that it would like a brick would fall. So if nafel arche, but a brick didn't fall, but nafel inhu, an animal fell. So tchilasa b'pshia was b'oinasu. It's still when it came to this tchilasa b'pshia would be a case of a brick, but it was ended up not being broken that way. It was broken b'oinis, by a falling animal. A narrow wall. What does that mean? We're going to actually stop here. Look at Rashi. Shemake hagag tsar v'dochok. The roof was very narrow. V'chi henicham b'rosh hagag havile lasuki daite dekatse amake kedarkan. You would think that it would still land on it potentially, because since it's a kaisel tsar, there's a good chance that there was not a lot of space anyway. I think that's how to read it. Let's look at Rabbi Gibber's question 3-4. Hakel v'gdi shenaflu mereshagag v'shiver sekel and paturin. If it broke, so amai paturin. So one is pashit because tchilasoi. No, I underline this. B'pshia v'sayv b'aynis pater. Or even if you hold tchilaso b'pshia v'sayv b'aynis, you're chayev. Still here, it is a case where the kalim are placed close to the wall, so your pater, if the animal falls, since even tchilasa b'pshia leika. Let's see. Okay. All right, that's that for that. Question 7. Hakel v'di shenaflu mirosh hagag be'ez oifen pater l'kuli alma be'ez oifen chayiv l'kuli alma. So, if the kalim are close to the wall, you're pater l'kuli alma, because even there's not even pshia b'tchila, right? Because it was not supposed to break. B'kaisel tsar, if it's a very narrow wall, chayiv l'kuli alma, because falling or jumping it's going to land basically in the same area. I think that's the idea of how to read that. Okay. Let's see. Question TA10, no. Question TB10, okay? Let's see what we have over here. Hakel v'gdi shekavtze merosh hagag v'shover kel mishalom nezek shalim. Ma kushya. What's the question? Mekan l'man di'avad chlis v'shiv v'seifa b'oinis chayiv v'ma teretz. So what's the question? Kan yesh pshia b'tchila v'zeh machlokas im chayiv olo. So that's because that's the case. Tchilas b'shia v'seifa b'oinis. So what do you do? It's a machlokas. So over here it says you pay full damages. The one who says you're chayiv, okay, let's see what I wrote. Im habal habayis munachas hakelim karov samach kaisel, very close to the wall. Oz ain't tchilas b'pshia klal. There's no tchilas b'pshia. She'im hu kafatz, if it would have jumped, lo shiveres hakelim, it wouldn't have broken the vessels. Im yesh kaisel tsar. I had no idea what this question was. I just wrote everything that I sometimes do. If the narrow wall is narrow, oz yesh chiyav shezeh pshia sheshach shekaisel neifel al aretz. The shot of this is that the wall is narrow, and therefore it may end up falling. Okay, or it's just more likely that again that the animal's going to fall. Rashi says a sarmashupa. So anyway, in that case, it's like tchilasa b'pshia, and therefore because of that, it's also saifa b'pshia, because no matter what, this was going to break, falling or jumping, and therefore you're going to be chayiv l'kol yalma. Ad kan.